Hello, welcome to the Irreverent Reader. Tonight we are going to talk about concepts and the language of thought. This is not the same as the language that we speak, or even necessarily what you might consider the language of your thoughts. This is more the pattern of conceptualization inside your head. For example, the concept of a daisy doesn't require you to think the word. This car's driving by. Doesn't require you to think the word daisy. There's no need to contemplate the number of petals or even what size they are or even an actual real life thing. You can still contemplate a daisy. So this is called Mentalese. It is the hypothesized language of thought. This isn't an intense field of study. It is, studying this is intense because the mental acrobats that you have to do, acrobatics, is quite impressive, actually. Some of the writing is dry. It's dry. It's very dry. But it's interesting once you start picking it apart. So, Mentalese. It's an innate ability that we have, and our minds are capable of developing and holding these contemplations. So, to start, there are mental words such as daisy, and we take these mental words. Sorry, I hope you guys can't hear the cars that keep driving by. Kind of live on a busy street. Okay, so there's mental words, and we take mental words and we build them together with other concepts, and we make conceptual sentences. And it isn't the same as our spoken languages. They don't know if there is a structure across Mentalese as there is with spoken languages, because spoken languages are an agreed upon system of a culture. They have a network that is used to create a dialect or a particular branch of a language. We don't have that in our minds. We can't connect with other minds in order to agree upon some sort of mental grammar. That is not to say that it doesn't exist. It's not to say that people in a family or a group of friends or even people of a particular community can't have similar thought patterns and similar conceptualizations. In fact, I would argue that that's definitely the case, that it is absolutely the case that a group, especially if you have a secluded group, for instance, I'm from the Ozarks, I've talked about this before. In the Ozarks, there is very much an insular attitude. They don't like outsiders. They don't want people to come into their communities, which sounds like a racial dog whistle now that I'm thinking about it, and I will have to contemplate that later. But across the group, there are particular patterns of thought. And this is true of any close-knit community. There's certainly an agreed upon or a a pattern that people follow. But while we can observe this externally, there is no way to really know that this is the case mentally, because we can't be inside each other's heads. We can't observe the conceptualization of the other. We can only discuss what we believe is happening inside our own heads and compare it to what another person says is happening inside their heads. And that's very difficult to do. How do you tell a person what the color green looks like to you? You can say it's the color of the grass, but there's no way to truly share the mental experience. Okay, so we have a daisy. It is a thing, and we can contemplate it. And to build upon that, we can say a daisy is a flower. So now we take a thing and we can categorize it according to its sameness of or with other things or other flowers. And it's an important step toward a more complex thought pattern. I know that to say a daisy, you're capable of contemplating a daisy, is it's so kind of silly and ridiculous and simplistic. And to say that we can build concepts, again, it seems so mundane and everyday, and it is. But once we take this concept to the more complex, that's when it becomes kind of exhausting and daunting to conceptualize. So, Mentalese, or the language of thought that is required to hold more complex ideas. So not just to say a thing is a type of thing, but to, instead of having a single word as that thing you are contemplating, to have entire ideas, to have belief systems. So the language mentally that it takes to hold religious beliefs, to have philosophical ideas, is much, much more impressive. So if we take, for instance, a kind of cliche example at this point of the golden rule, and we contemplate the mentalese that it takes to understand, treat others as you would want to be treated. This requires the conceptualization of self and the conceptualization of other. It requires the mental language to understand that the other is capable of having the same emotional complexity as the self. See my other video on Martin Buber, his philosophy on I and thou. Video here or here. I don't know which one it is. So, in addition to the self and the other and the emotional complexity of the other being the same as the self, it requires the concept of wanting. You have to be able to understand your own innate desire and what that means, be able to apply that to someone else's wanting, understanding that their wanting is the same as your wanting, or at least as legitimate. And this then furthers itself into an understanding and conceptualization of mutuality and reciprocity, this byway of relationship or of give and take, right? All of those things happen in the blink of an eye. This doesn't take deep contemplation to understand that someone else wants to be treated the same as you do. This seems very everyday, but in reality, it's quite a leap from the language that it takes to know that a daisy is a flower. A 2-year-old knows that. To the language mentally that it takes to understand and simultaneously contemplate all of those different concepts like that. So these concepts, they build a relational connection, and not just to the individual, but they build a relational connection to each other within the individual's mental language. Okay? So they become a chain of mental representations. So it's not just one item that you conceptualize because you know how your brain works. It's an item you conceptualize that is tied to another thing that you conceptualize that makes you think of another thing. And the speed with which your brain works. So if we think of examples of this representational relationship or this relational interaction that these ideas have, the ideation, this particular ideation may be supportive of this one over here, and this one may be in opposition to another idea altogether, and yet the one that it's in opposition to may not be contrary to the one that's supportive. So there's a complex network of ideas that are woven together in your head, and you don't even have to think about it. Okay, so I'm going to read a quote. So I'm going to be looking over here. So the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy explains compositionality of mental representation. Okay. Mental representations have a compositional semantics. Complex representations are composed of simple constituents, and the meaning of a complex representation depends upon the meanings of its constituents together with the constituency structure into which those constituents are arranged. I'll do it again. You ready? Mental representations have a compositional semantics. Complex representations are composed of simple constituents, and the meaning of a complex representation depends upon the meaning of its constituents together with the constituency structure into which those constituents are arranged. So, in other words, what you believe is dependent on the ideas you hold about the world, its existence, its relation to you, and all of the things and the people and how they're arranged in that world. Duh. Right? Of course, our beliefs are determined by those we're around and the ideas we've been presented with and the way we look at the world. Of course, our view of the world is determined by our perception. It's kind of the whole ball game. Just as the conceptualization of a daisy categorized as a flower seems very simplistic, and yet it lays the groundwork for more complex conceptualizations, like the Golden Rule. So too, this simple idea of your beliefs as determined by how you perceive the world sets out the possibility for more complex understandings of how our internal and our external states of being synergistically build upon one another. They become combined with one another, right? Naturally. And so, for instance, the nature of how conflict management was handled in your childhood home determines how you interpret the mannerisms, the actions as motivations or lack thereof of your coworker in Tuesday's staff meeting. The way that you learned to interact with a sibling or a parent or, a grandparent or whomever, that determines the way you interact in situations that you wouldn't naturally think are determined by those educational formative years. And yet they are. Ask any therapist about cycles in validation and self-esteem or accomplishment. And still, most of us take this kaleidoscope experience, this almost psychedelic innate ability, completely for granted. It's as though the everyday our brains are choreographing these complex ballets to a lost Tchaikovsky composition, and our brain performs in ways that are too complex for us to truly understand and for us to truly even study yet. We don't understand consciousness. We are trying, but we don't understand it. We don't understand fully. There's lots of hypotheses. There's lots of philosophical discussion, theological writings about why we believe in certain things. Why does every culture in history that we know of have religion? Most people would say, well, that's because clearly religion is real, because clearly there is something beyond us. But why do we believe it? Why do we take that information? We don't understand these things. We don't know why our brains work the way they do. So taking these seemingly simplistic, almost childish, naive aspects of how our brains work and picking them apart down to the simple word daisy, the simple mental word daisy, is an attempt to break these challenges down to a level that we can begin to work with. It's an attempt to find the atom, and then to find the nucleus, and then to find the quark. We haven't even found the atom yet. We have no idea why we are conscious, why we know that we think, why we are aware of the other. And so we have these conceptualizations in our head that we take with us every day in our lives, and it's everything. It's everything we hope for. It's everything we build our lives toward, that we teach our children, that we fight for. It's all of our religions, our ideologies. It's everything that we've constructed as people, as not as a people, as a culture that we've built toward. We hold these complex ideas in our head, and we've built them up brick by brick, like idea by idea. And if you think it's simple to conceptualize the flower, then try to untangle the chain of mental events that constitute your beliefs. Pick one, pick a belief. Why do I believe that? What are the pieces of this conceptual sentence? If I believe that reality is an illusion, how do I begin to break down that idea from a fun article that I read on the internet to the understanding of how my body senses input, the light that comes in my eyes, the air that I feel on my skin, the sounds and vibrations that I hear, and knowing that those are sensed by my body and interpreted by my brain. And then I put together the best of my brain's ability what I call reality. If I were to try to truly untangle the mental language that it took for me to agree with this idea, say, yes, I think that's true, it would be unending. It would be infinite. I would turn inward on myself with contemplation. But is it worth understanding how we got where we are? Or why the world is the way that it is? Can we disentangle the list of daily tasks that we perform and separate it from the expectations that society puts on us? Can we pull those strands and unravel the why and the how and the conceptual overtone and the and really understand the mental, emotional effort that we're putting into all of it? And so thought, language, and the possibilities that it makes available to us are seemingly infinite, and certainly reach depths that are probably impossible to achieve for an individual. But I think it's worth contemplating. I think it's important to try to figure it out. Not all of it. It's not worth it to spiral. That's another thing. Will contemplation interrupt your life? That's a possibility. Again, ask any therapist. So if this contemplation sends you spiraling into too internal, to the point that it causes you, it makes you depressed, or it causes you some sort of distress, then the nice thing about it is that it's unnecessary. Like I said, these are innate abilities. You don't have to try to conceptualize or to be able to conceptualize. So you can just not, if it is overwhelming or too nihilistic, because that's the other thing. I can be a little bit of a nihilist. The key, I think, is to find the medium place, to contemplate your existence in the world to the point that you don't need to be beholden to masters, and you don't need to fulfill others' expectations. But to not allow yourself to be pulled into not a narcissism, I don't mean narcissism, but into a self-doubt or a questioning state, or an existential crisis. Do we exist? In some form, yes. Do we know why or how we exist? No, we don't. Does it matter? I don't think so. So, like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. It's fine. I hope that you enjoy listening to me ramble, that you get something from the insane way. Maybe insane's not a nice word to use, but the intense way that my brain sometimes works. I think it's fun. So I will put the link to the Stanford, the entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that I read about the language of thought. It's very long. It's pretty interesting. But, have yourself some fun. Reading that might help you fall asleep.